Hi everybody, my name is Grace Bubeck and today I'm with Joan Tollifson for another live online conversation. Today the topic is growing old and dying, a non-dual perspective. And I welcome Joan to this conversation. Hi Joan.
Hi Grace.
And welcome to all of you. And I just want to introduce Joan quickly. Joan is a writer and she's published several books. She has roots in both the Zen and the Advaita traditions, but isn't confined by either, as far as I can tell. And two of her books, which I really like the titles of, are Bare Bones Meditation and Awake in the Heartland. And there's also something about painting on the sidewalk with water. Is that it, Joan?
Painting the sidewalk with water.
Yeah.
Grasp.
Yeah, great. So I think I'm just going to hand over to you, Joan, and you're going to just lead us into the topic and we'll take it from there.
Okay.
Oh, and just to say, for those who participate for the first time in one of these live conversations, the first part of the conversation, which is about 3/4 of an hour roughly, will be between Joan and me. And after that, the floor is open for questions from you and also for you to join us on the Google Hangout. I will post the link to join us on the Hangout and ask your questions live. I will post that on the YouTube comment thread, which is to the right of the video that you're watching right now on the same YouTube page, the live watching page. And you can also post your questions or comments on the YouTube thread. And you can, if you wish, you can, just sign in and say hello and let us know where you're from. That's always nice to see where people are joining us from for this event. But now over to Joan.
Okay. Thank you, Grace. Welcome, everybody. I've been working on a book about aging and dying for over a decade now. And I started working on it when I was in Chicago, and I had moved back to Chicago in 2000. That's the city where I was born. I moved back there to be with my mother, who was then in her 90s, in her final years of life. And I stayed for several more years to be with one of her close friends in her final years. And during the time that I was in Chicago, I went through menopause, and I was in my 50s, and I started actually experiencing the aging of my own body in a much more visceral way than I ever had before. And of course, I was also seeing my mother and her aging body. I had been with aging relatives who got old and died when I was younger, but I was younger then. This time, I was aging, so it all felt much more immediate in some way. And I got interested in how the aging process and the dying process in so many ways seem to resemble the awakening journey, in that it involved surrendering and giving up control or the illusion of control, and letting go, things falling away. And it's kind of an interesting place to explore, because on the one hand, growing old and dying is such an obvious part of life, unavoidable, obvious part of life. And then on the other hand, when we're awake in this moment, we see that there really is no death, nothing to die, nothing to be born, no age, and so on. So that's kind of what I'm playing with and exploring in this book that I've been working on. And meanwhile, I keep getting older and older, and I hope to finish the book before we're all dead. And what I hope to convey in this book, there's aging is becoming a more popular topic now. When I was growing up, death and dying was just completely never talked about. It was, well, in the old days, death and dying was kind of part of everybody's life because old people lived with the family and with the community. And but then we came up with nursing homes and retirement homes, and old people sort of got warehoused and put out of sight. And so as I was growing up in the late 40s and 50s, 1950s, old age and dying were sort of things you didn't see or talk about as much as possible. And eventually people did start to talk more about death with the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and others, and the hospice movement. And now that we baby boomers are reaching old age is becoming, and aging is becoming a topic. But I noticed that a lot of what's out there about it is this kind of attempt to, in a subtle way, deny it, like inspirational stories about people who are 90 years old and they're still skydiving and climbing mountains and getting into wonderful new romantic relationships. And while that's a possibility, most 90-year-olds are not skydiving or getting into wonderful new romantic relationships. And so I wanted to look at this topic in a way that doesn't close our eyes to the difficulties and the messiness of it, or try to sanitize it, which is also what our culture does. I mean, we're very much a youth-oriented culture, and people do everything possible. Often they have to keep their jobs, especially women, to dye your hair, you get Botox, you have plastic surgery, you take erectile dysfunction drugs, you do whatever you possibly can to pretend that you're 20 or 30 years younger than you actually are. And when we think about the things that are involved in aging, it can seem very scary, and it's often just hidden from view. But lots of things happen as you get older. You lose your hearing, maybe. You lose cognitive abilities. You may become incontinent. You may start having bowel and bladder accidents in public places. You may find that you may have things like erectile dysfunction and vaginal dryness and atrophy and all sorts of things that are barely spoken about. You may find that you're on a walker suddenly. You may have painful arthritis. So it can be painful and messy. Some people have an easier old age than others. My teacher, Toni Packer, spent the last decade of her life with an increasingly debilitating and excruciatingly painful condition. She was bedridden for the last 3, maybe 4 years of her life. I forget exactly. And some people end up in nursing homes. So it's not always as pretty as these stories where people are skydiving and getting into exciting new romances. But on the other hand, it can be very beautiful. And what I discovered in being with my mother in her old age was that it was beautiful. I mean, she was beautiful. She was so beautiful in her surrendering of things. She was an incredibly extroverted person who was very active. And all of a sudden she was more and more limited, and she couldn't hear, and she couldn't cognitively follow things the same way, and she couldn't go to things the same way. And she just had a beautiful way of surrendering all that and being with, just appreciating. She'd look out the window and she'd say, I'm so blessed to have this view. And, she was looking at buildings, but it was like she just appreciated whatever was there. And if I would take her out in the wheelchair, she would be so appreciative of every little thing. And even the parts that you would normally think of as ugly or disturbing, the things that involved the aging body and its various excretions and difficulties, even those I found an incredible beauty in all of it. And the whole process of her dying was just so beautiful. And so, I was actually in bliss, when she died. I really just felt this, I was crying too, but I felt this huge opening. And so it's both a beautiful process, and in some ways, it can be a very difficult process. And it's all of that. And then at the same time, what dies? What is born? What dies? When we really look closely, we can't find where anything begins or ends. And we can't find this body when we look closely. We have a kind of mental image of it, a concept of it, my body. But when we really tune in with awareness just to sensation, where is it? We can't even really pin it down or find it. And so in that sense, you realize there is no death, really. There is no death. There's our fear of death is sort of like the fear that people used to have of sailing out into the ocean and falling off the edge of the earth. It's based on a false idea of reality. And I thought we might explore that a little by if everyone would just like to close their eyes for a moment. And just take a moment to just feel the breathing, and not trying to control it or change it, but just feeling it, letting it be the way it is. Hearing whatever sounds are here in the room or outside. Just allowing everything to be the way it is in this moment. And then, without referring to thought or memory, what are you right now? Without referring to thought or memory, do you have an age? Or a gender? Or a life situation? A race? An ethnicity? A purpose in life? Without referring to thought or memory, there's just this knowingness of being present, isn't there? And this present happening exactly the way it is. And if you look closely, can you find an actual place where the breath crosses over from inside to outside? You might be able to picture a place like the nostrils, but in feeling into it, looking with awareness, can you actually find a boundary between inside of you and outside of you? Or is it one seamless whole? And if you open your eyes and just take in everything around you, the colors, the shapes. Even though thought can identify all kinds of different objects, are they not all appearing as one whole painting, one whole picture? And can you find a boundary between you and that picture? Can you find a place where awareness ends and the colors and shapes begin? Is there a boundary? Can you see that you would not be here without the sun and the rain and the earth and the cows that your parents ate and the vegetables that your parents ate and the rain that grew those vegetables and the food that sustained those cows? You would not be here without the whole universe being exactly the way it is. And where exactly do you begin? Where did this body-mind even begin? At birth? At conception? When your parents met? At the Big Bang? And it hasn't been the same body from one moment to the next. It's not even the same body that was here when we started this meeting. It's changed. Everything has changed. The whole universe has changed. And yet, in the middle of all the changes, it's always here. It's always now. Wherever we go, we're here. And whatever time it is, it's now. So there's this amazing here now that is ever present and ever changing. And if you try to grasp it as an object, immediately you're creating the illusion of separation between you and it. But in your actual experience, there is no separation. There's just this simplicity of this present happening, in which there is really no aging or dying. There's just what's here in this moment. And if we put scary labels on things like erectile dysfunction or vaginal atrophy or being on a walker or nursing home, suddenly it seems very scary. But those are all thoughts and stories. And when we're with the actuality of those things, should they happen, they're just happenings, even pain, whatever. In just being with the sensations of it, it's no longer the same as when we're thinking about it, when we seem to be separate from it. So to be aware of how we create these fears by telling stories and putting labels on things. So maybe that's enough for me. You want to jump in, Grace?
Yeah, thank you. You know, usually when I kind of just prepare for these events, often there's just something that comes to me, and there is totally, absolutely nothing today. Great emptiness, and
just like death.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, you know, in some ways, aging also involves, I mean, at least in my experience of it, you know, at that phenomenal level, the mind just becomes more and more empty. And, you know, everybody talks about memory loss and this and that. And I don't actually find that, I mean, you know, sometimes it's a bit dysfunctional and I have to ask things again or, you know, be reminded. But I actually find that very restful, that the mind is becoming more quiet. You know, it's like I don't, and I don't know, is that a question just of age, or is it a question of living in a way that no longer refers to the mind all the time, you know. I don't know, maybe it's both. But what I actually totally enjoy is that the mind isn't kind of doesn't fill the awareness of what is here often, you know. It's just like, well, it's actually quite quiet, and I love it, you know. It's like there's no need to fill that emptiness. And that to me is actually quite something in that is also about age, because as we become older, you know, we start letting go of things. You know, where in our younger years we kind of accumulated, you know, experiences, knowledge, degrees, you know, money, things, people in our lives, friends, etc. At some point things turn, and, you know, you start kind of simplifying, you know, you start letting go, and actually there's such a beauty in this. I just, you know, I can't see the problem in that.
I think when we're young, we're you know, we're so focused on the future too, or at least I was, you know, and I had this sort of feeling like my real life hadn't started yet. You know, it was going to start eventually. I would find the right place to live, or the right spiritual teaching, or the right something. You know, I would finally get there, and or I'd finally be enlightened, or whatever it was. There was always sort of something out there ahead of me in this future, and you know, working towards that. And these grand purposes, you know, I was fighting the revolution, or I was getting enlightened, or I was, you know, one thing or another, you know, some grand purpose. And now, you know, if there isn't a future. I mean, there is, in some sense there is, but I mean, there's no, I'm not going to medical school or law school, you know, there isn't a future in that sense anymore. And it's, and those grand purposes have fallen away. And there's a kind of waking, and I think this often happens, you know, is what I saw in my mother, certainly, you know, is there's just kind of a waking up to what's actually the only thing that's ever real, which is right here, right now. And, you know, this present moment that seems so ordinary if we think about it. You know, we think, oh, you know, it's just a piece of Kleenex. I've seen that before. That's nothing. But when we really look at it, it's this beautiful, amazing form, shape. And, you know, and we start becoming more awake, I think, just to the simplicity of the moment, and also the beauty of purposelessness. And, you know, not because once, you know, the whole search for meaning is what creates the feeling of meaninglessness, you know, and it all sort of falls away. And there's just, and I don't know what part of that is aging and what part of that is sort of the spiritual unfolding. And I think they're very connected in some way, maybe. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know, in traditional, I don't know whether it's Hindu or yogic teachings, you know, there's the, you know, 50, really, you're into the spiritual phase of life, which is interesting because, you know, it equates the spiritual phase of life with the phase of life where aging becomes very obvious. And I can't remember whether it's 40 or 50, and obviously, you know, people didn't live as long, maybe. Yeah, even in those societies, I don't know, but there definitely seems to be a, you know, when I was reflecting on this topic, when I was sending out a newsletter, it was exactly that reflection that came to me, that when we're young, we usually have a future, you know, and somehow the future fuels what we do. You know, we work towards something, you know, we want to, you know, find a husband or wife or some ultimately fulfilling relationship, or, you know, the perfect job or the perfect home or perfect, you know, whatever it is, career. And of course, you know, the experience is that once we found those things, you know, that it's like, it's not exactly what we thought it was.
Yeah.
So we're either on to the next thing, or at some point we learn you know, what the Buddhists call the unsatisfactoriness of life. You know, it's like nothing will ever meet this search, other than what is real. You know, what is permanent, what is true. And when we get older, somehow the future, you know, it can switch to something that we're then afraid of and that we have to guard against.
Yeah.
Or it can be truly liberating, and it can really fall away, and there's just a sense of, well, this is it. You know, and it's not going to get any better. It'll just be what it'll be at this level of you know, lived experience. And at the same time, and you know, truly, I don't know, is that sense of that no longer being as important as it used to be, is that because I know what's real, and I know what isn't changing, you know, what isn't, what doesn't deteriorate, you know. Does that make aging easier? Probably.
Yeah.
But you know, I think it's just maybe also just this flip into aging that somehow can be very liberating, even for people who don't, you know, who are not on a spiritual quest, who are not interested in spiritual truth as such, but somehow there's a natural letting go also in that kind of phase of life that's about growing old. And it kind of, you know, it naturally invites people into a different, more inner way of living and experiencing. I'm not saying this very well.
No, that's very clear. Yeah. And it's true, because the outward things, kind of like with my mother, who was a very extroverted person, but, you know, she could no longer, she went to the theater, she couldn't hear it anymore. She tried to watch a simple TV show, but I could tell that cognitively she wasn't quite tracking the plot anymore. She'd try to read a novel, and this is happening to me now to some degree. You know, you can't remember who the characters are once you get 20 pages in. You know, it's like, you know, she would go to a party, and she would just be sitting there and couldn't hear anything that was happening. And people invited her less often, of course, sometimes. And so she was spending more and more time alone and in a very introverted, kind of solitary place. So I think that is just kind of a feature. But clearly many people resist, you know, old age, and are in terror of it and fighting it the whole way. And many people on their deathbed, you know, just hanging on desperately, don't want to die, terrified of dying. None of that was true of my mother. You know, she was ready to go, you know. But So I do think that this kind of spiritual awakening is very helpful, in facing any kind of adversity or, pain or anything of disappointment, any of those things. Because it's true, as long as we're operating from the perspective of the illusion of being a separate little fragment, trying to find, always feeling like we lack something and always trying to find something, it's perpetually dissatisfying with these brief moments of satisfaction in between. And it's the falling away of that search, really, and just the willingness to be this moment, however it is, that is eventually liberating. And when I say eventually, I'm not trying to suggest a finish line after which everything is great, but just in any moment of being awake is how I see it. That's how it is. Yeah, it's interesting. My first lover, who I was with in college, we both moved to Ashland at exactly the same time, unbeknownst to each other. And then she died here, and I was with her in her dying process. And she had been a competitive athlete who competed in triathlons. She was physically very fit, and she, in the course of her dying, she just lost. She lost everything. She lost the ability. In the end, she couldn't swallow. She couldn't move. She couldn't talk. She couldn't do anything. And because her organs and everything were in such good shape from being an athlete, it took a really long time for her to actually die. So, as I said at the time, there are some advantages to being out of shape, but it took a really long time. And she, we have the right to die here in Oregon, where you can get a prescription to, if you have a terminal illness. And she had utilized that, and we had picked up the prescription. We had it, she thought she was going to do it, and I was going to be with her. But in the end, she never took it. Many people don't. They just get it, and then they don't take it. And the thing that she kept saying over and over through her whole dying process was, as long as she could talk, was, it's so interesting how things are falling away. She kept just saying, it's so interesting how things are falling away. And, if we think about that situation from the outside, it seems so horrible. Here's this competitive athlete, bedridden, unable to move. What could be worse? But from her perspective, it was, and from my perspective too, being part of it, it was actually beautiful and really not terrible at all. It was interesting and heart-opening.
Yeah.
And the compassionate dying people, they were suggested that she might want to have people singing to her as she died, and she just rolled her eyes. and her partner said, I think, what she liked to do when she was alive was she liked to watch MSNBC on TV. So I think we should just leave MSNBC on. And so instead of having harp music and people singing, we had the TV on. We had MSNBC, and then we also would watch she liked these weekend crime mystery shows. So we'd have weekend crime mysteries, disaster shows, and MSNBC, which at the time was the Republican primaries for the previous not this election, but the one before. And that to me was so, me, I would have liked to just be there in silence, but so for me, it was kind of this wonderful stretch because, and I eventually came to this place of seeing the beauty of MSNBC and weekend crime mysteries and all of this being the surroundings of this actually incredibly peaceful, beautifully heart-opening dying that was occurring. So it's a wonderful possibility too that like, sort of all of our ideas of how this is going to go can fall away.
Mm, mm. It just occurs to me, Joan. I talked to Joan Levinsky, who was a student of Jean Klein's and had been a non-dual teacher and yoga teacher. And she was terminally ill at the time with lung cancer, and about 4 months before she passed away. And I had the same sense of her being really open to things falling away. And so she was talking about the beauty of lying in the back of the car as she was driven to some hospital appointment and looking up and seeing the flowers in the window boxes, or the boxes in the balconies of houses for the first time, because she'd always been driving and intent on, focusing on the street and the roads. And so now, not being able to do this actually allowed her to see the beauty of her surroundings in a totally different way. So in that conversation also, there was this sense of her just feeling the liberation of so much falling away, so much that would have been of concern for her, mm-hmm. were her life still going on in its normal ways. Mm-hmm. And for sure, a lot of striving falls away because, it's no longer possible. Mm-hmm. So that is felt as liberating. Mm-hmm. But I feel what we maybe need to look at a bit more closely is the fears that arise about growing old and dying, and which are basically about loss of control. Mm-hmm. And that's where the growing old and the dying is more challenging to people. That's why they don't want to go there. And in today's society, and with like you mentioned, there's so many ways that we can pretend we're not growing older. We can, have surgery, to get rid of the lines in our faces and, lift the skin this way and that way. And so much that can be done by our hairs. And coming from Europe originally, I can see that that's a particularly North American thing, because in Europe that's less widespread still, although it's also coming. Europeans are a bit behind the North Americans, but this obsession with not appearing to be aging is not quite the same in Europe. There's a lot of women who just have gray hair, full stop,
It's different in different parts of this country too. Like where I live in Oregon, there's a lot of white-haired older women.
Yes.
If you go to certain other places, you won't see hardly any.
Yeah.
It can really vary in different areas too.
Yeah. Yes. But and there's so much in the medical system and advancement also that allows people to continue to be mobile, like hip replacements, knee replacements. There is so much that can be done to help the body to continue to function. Mm-hmm. And that makes for lives that are much less pain-ridden than they used to be. I think that's very true. and beautiful, I mean, and at the same time, it keeps all these possibilities, keep somehow the illusion going that we can be in control of life and the aging. And so somehow, the point where people really need to let go and where nothing else can be done. I mean, I have an uncle who resists dying. He's been resisting for years. He has a heart that doesn't function anymore. And, somehow the doctors keep managing to keep him alive in some way or another. His quality of life is not very good, but, there's nothing, he cannot face the idea of death. And he keeps going to the hospital, and something else needs to be done. And somehow there's this idea that the doctors could keep him alive forever because he cannot go to that place of having to let go at some point. It's like that's the real challenge of growing old. We can talk about the liberating aspects, but the real challenge is to actually to keep facing this thing that this experience of no longer being in control of what we were in control of, seemingly, and maybe at some level actually, and that's where it becomes kind of juicy, That's where somehow, when we're willing to really experience those things fully, these ways of losing control, it's like, something can be discovered there.
Mm-hmm.
That's not that we kind of lose when we don't face that loss of control. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And, my mother, certainly lost, she was someone who was very, very into, as she used to say, running her own ship. She did not like the idea of being dependent on anyone, or, she was running her own ship. And, eventually I was handling her finances. I was making many decisions for her. She was she had incontinence accidents in public places. I mean, she lost control in a multitude of ways. And I didn't know how she would take that, because she was someone who had been so into being in control in a way. But she took it so well. It was like, it really was this amazing opening that I saw happening, surrendering. And just it was such a graceful being with that. And, but that really is a lot of what comes up. I mean, when you think about the fear of breaking a hip or something, it's like, what is the fear about? Well, maybe physical pain, but it's also about, who's going to take care of me? What will I do? There's just sort of a feeling that you become, in some way, you go back to childhood. I mean, you become dependent. You become dependent on other people. And you never really know how that's going to play out. I mean, you never really know who's going to be at your deathbed, or who's going to be there for you at the end. It may not be the person that you anticipated being there, if you did anticipate someone would be there. And it may be someone you would never have imagined. And, I really wanted to be at my mother's deathbed when she was dying. And I was there, the day before and all day. And then I went to drive her oldest friend home. And she died while I was, driving her friend home. And I knew exactly the moment she died. It was like, I felt it. And I just felt this peace at that moment. And, and it was perfect. Yeah. I mean, she needed to die when I wasn't there, apparently. And it's like with your with your uncle. We don't know when we don't know when, like with my first lover. I mean, she thought she was going to take this medicine to end her life when she got to a certain stage, and then she didn't, because it was so interesting to her, in whatever way, to be there. She wasn't ready to leave, and I don't think it was a fear of death. I think it was just she was still in some way interested in being alive, and we sort of don't know. At what point, we don't know how we're going to respond when we're in those situations. But we do live in a society now where, there's so much medical care where the purpose of medicine is to keep you alive as long as possible. And often keeping people alive in situations that don't seem very desirable. And so many of us are sort of, you start at a certain age to think about when you might want to refuse treatment for something, or what would you do if you got a certain diagnosis? Would you go through the treatment, or would you let this be your exit, And I don't think any of us can know what we'll do in those situations. And when, because it's sort of like life moves in its own way. We're never really in control. And we're always really dependent. I mean, we wouldn't be here without everything in the whole universe being the way it is. So it's an illusion that we're independent and that we're running our own ship, really.
Yes.
And that we're in control. But it becomes much more obvious that is as we move into old age. And yeah.
Yes, like you say, I mean, we're never really in control, but somehow, growing into adults and being in adult life, a lot of it is about gaining control of things and being in control and staying in control of things. I mean, that's the survival mechanism, and we can somehow, in some lives, that mechanism can be kept alive for a long time. And it can keep running the show. And in some lives, in some ways, it's just interrupted. And that's, in some ways, the lucky lives, because they get it earlier than others. But, somehow growing old, this illusion of being in control just cannot be maintained in the same way.
Yeah, and I think, if people are growing up in Syria or something, I mean, I don't think they're probably growing up with a big illusion of, So what we're talking about is very much about people in a certain cultural situation. But, and even people in the many parts of the inner city in the United States, are growing up with the, young Black men with the expectation that they probably won't make it to middle age or something. So, but for many of us, I think, and of course, some people have something, are in a terrible accident when they're 25 and they, turn into a quadriplegic or something, and they have to face a lot of this when they're 25. But for many of us, it is kind of as we move into old age that we really come face to face with the loss of control and the vulnerability of the body and all of that.
Yeah. Maybe that's a good moment to look at whether there may be any questions.
Okay.
Let's see who's there and who has a question. I'm just going to see on the YouTube comment thread. If you bear with me for a second, Joan, you can take a break. I'm just waiting for the page to load. Taking a long time today. There we are. Okay. So Noria says she's ready. Vidal, this is at the beginning, at the outset. Monica Salsi, hi everybody. Thank you, Grace. So happy to meet Joan live. Dale says howdy from North Carolina. Rashani Ree, lovely to be here with you from the big island of Hawaii.
Hello, Rashani.
Mary O'Keefe, hi from very snowy Ottawa. Hi, Mary. Cybermuse, Shoshana here from Ashland, Oregon, and glad to be participating. Pat Fitzmaurice is joining us from Quebec City. Noria says namaste from Ibiza. And Monica, much love from Italy. Hi, Monica. Okay, so there's some conversation about whether it started or not. Noria says, such deep words and a sense of humor, beautiful. And Ilse Fischer, greetings and thanks from Germany.
Greetings.
Yeah, greetings to you. Gail and Porter Story from Boulder, Colorado. Thank you both. This is so helpful, especially about losing control. Nishkala says, good to be with you, Joan. Much love. Hi, Nishkala. She's from Ithaca, New York. She loves this topic. And I realized I forgot to post the link to the Hangout, so let me do that.
Okay.
Just to say, I will post the link on the YouTube comment thread, and so you can come on to the Hangout if you so wish, and maybe just share your experiences, ask questions. Yes, I just posted the link. So it usually takes people a little bit of time because there's a time lag between between the actual our talking and the video that's being broadcast. And it takes people time to get into the Hangout. But let's see how that. You're certainly very welcome to join us. And you're also welcome to ask if you have a question or want to share something. You can also do that on the YouTube comment thread. Either is good. So, Joan, did you want to add anything at this point?
Well, one thing that I often just point out is that our fear of death is often a fear of sort of not being here, from the perspective of imagining that we're here, knowing that we're not here, like being buried alive or something. Whereas actually, we die not only moment to moment, but we die every night in deep sleep. Everything perceivable and conceivable disappears, and the one who is concerned about all this disappears, and we find it a very rejuvenating and relaxing and enlivening experience. Actually, it's not an experience really, but I mean, we find that experiencelessness very peaceful, and in realizing that there's nothing is really going to die. There's nothing. They say in Buddhism that the true understanding of impermanence is that there is no impermanence because nothing actually forms in the first place to be impermanent. There's only this flux and change, which is, in a sense, this, it's, and so when you see that, it's like, there's nothing here that's continuing anyway. It's all one whole happening here now. And and not being here, and we have no experience of not being here. So death is this sort of imaginary thing. It's kind of, but I think a lot of the fear, as we've been talking about, is really about what happens before death, and the fear of losing control and being in physical pain and that kind of thing.
Actually, I do think it's both. I think it's about losing control, and it's also about dying. There's this idea that somehow we cease to exist, and
like I'll still be here, trying to get the TV back on so I can see what happens next in the story of my life and the story of the world. And I won't be able to find the TV channels. Well, it looks like someone is there with us.
Yes. So let me ask Nakia, Angelique. Let me see whether I can unmute you. Hello. See. Nakia, can you unmute yourself? Because I can't seem to do it. Hello.
A line just went through her microphone, so it looks like she was.
Well,
there's a line through.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, now it appeared on my screen.
I have no idea how to do this.
We can hear you, Nakia. Angelique.
Hello.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
How awesome. My name's Nakaya. And
Hi,
I thought
Nakaya.
Hi. So first of all, I'm surprised to be live. I've never done this before, so I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to do, but I really appreciate the conversation. I am in my 40s, and I have been thinking a lot about some of the things that you've been saying about loss of control in particular. And I feel like this conversation, I've been thinking about this as you've been talking. I don't know that people my age and in their 30s even, because I think that's when it started setting in for me about aging and dying. I don't know that we would be able to have the conversation in the way that it's being offered here, but I really wish that we had more opportunity to have the conversation at my age and a little younger, maybe to help with some of the fears that come up. I'm not really sure, but I'm just fascinated to be here. So at my age and a little younger, maybe to help with some of the fears that come up. I'm not really sure.
Nakia, I think we lost you. And Pat, I saw you come on, but we somehow, hi Pat, but we somehow lost Nakia in there. Hello?
Yeah, somehow her sound got lost, but maybe you can just respond to what she said, Joan?
Okay. Yeah, I think it, oh, there you are. Looks like I see, well, you're not actually the picture, there's a picture of you, but not, I don't know if you can hear this. I hope you can. But I think what you're saying is so important. I mean, it's like, in the same way that death was a forbidden topic when I was younger, and then it started to be talked about more, and now aging is starting to be talked about more. And I think, so many things in life are, when I was younger, so to be able to talk about more, and now aging is starting to be talked about more. And I think.
Okay, Pat. Hello, Pat.
Pat, you need to.
Pat, whoops. Okay. So, Pat, I'm just going to interrupt. Pat, can you close down your YouTube watch page? Because this is what interferes with the sound. I have to mute you at this point. But you can try and shut down the YouTube watch page, and there won't be any more interference, and then we'll get to you. Okay?
You have to leave the YouTube, or?
No, she doesn't have to leave the YouTube. She can just mute the mute the sound on the YouTube
It
watch
looks like
page?
there's a line through the microphone.
Yeah. Well, I've muted her, Joan.
Okay, now we're
But do continue with what you were saying.
okay. I was talking to Nakia, and I hope I pronounced her name right. My short-term memory doesn't last very long. But anyway, yeah, I think there's so many things in life that, you know, there's so much suffering when things are hidden from view and are forbidden, and somehow we can't talk about them. And when they finally come out into the open and we can share them and we can talk about them, it's so helpful. There's a wonderful TV program called Frankie and Grace, or Grace and Frankie, I forget which. It's got Lily Tomlin and Jane Fonda as a couple of women, you know, my age, and who are very different from each other. But they're actually it's a comedy. I mean, it's very funny. But they actually talk about things like vaginal atrophy, which I'd never even heard spoken aloud before, except in a medical office. And it's so relieving, you know, to have these things sort of out there. And you know, then you can joke about them, and you can find out what they are, and you can talk about them, and you can discover that you're not the only one who has this experience, and et cetera, et cetera. But when these things are privatized and hidden, then you feel like you're the only one who's got this issue or whatever, and it must be some, you know, so the more we can kind of go into all this stuff openly and talk about aging, and because it's something we're all going to go through if we're lucky. I mean, if we live that long. And we're going to go through it with other people too. I mean, because most of us deal with aging parents or aging loved ones. So it's kind of a part of life that's going to come up in one way or another for all of us, most likely. It's pretty hard to avoid it. So I think it's just, you know, it's a wonderful thing to start a conversation about, and to be able to talk about openly. And it seems like that's happening more and more. You know, I'm seeing more books on aging, and, you know, more, it is being talked about more. I think because baby boomers are now reaching old age. You know, it's kind of like, I've watched this all my life because I'm in the baby boomer years, you know, and it's like baby boomers reach menopause, baby boomers reach retirement, baby boomers reach, you know, it's sort of like, then all of a sudden it becomes a topic. And yeah, so I don't know, Nakia, but anyway, sorry we lost you on the sound.
Well, yeah, Nikaya, if you want to come back, please feel free to. You're actually, but maybe she muted herself again. I'm not sure. Yeah. So maybe I'll call on Pat. Pat, did you want to? I'm going to unmute you. I hope you've shut down the YouTube watch page by now. Hi, Pat. So maybe I'll call on Pat. Pat, did you? Oh dear. I'm going to unmute you. Pat, your page is still open. You're going to have to close it down.
Can you maybe explain to her? I don't think she's trying to talk, I think.
Yes.
I just want to say hello, that's all. Well, I have something here.
Maybe explain
I hear many voices at the same
she's
time.
trying to talk, I think.
Yes.
Yes.
I hear many voices at the same time.
Pat, it's really, you know, in the interest of everybody, because it's very unpleasant to have that interference. You have to the YouTube broadcast is at a slight delay from the actual sound in the Google Hangout. So that's what you hear, you know, that's the other voices that you hear. So you have to go back and mute that sound, and then you can speak to us directly.
Tell her how to do that, because she may not understand.
Well, you go back to the window of the YouTube watch page where you've been watching and where you found the link, You go back to that page, you find that window, you mute the sound, or you just simply, you turn down that page, you close that page altogether, and then you come back to the window that's the Google Hangout, okay? And we'll see whether that's possible. It's the blessings of technology, you know, sometimes it takes people time to kind of get the hang of it.
Well, I'm still in the 20th century, working my way towards the 21st century. So
yeah.
It sounds a little tricky, but hopefully, Pat, you can figure that out. Anyway, it's great to see you, and if you can figure that out, then we'll come back to you. And
looks like maybe she's figured it out. Let's see, Pat.
Try again. We'll try one more time.
Pat?
If you can figure that out, then we'll come back to you. And
looks like yeah, still the same problem. Pat? So we'll have to, Pat. I'm sorry. We'll have to leave you. But welcome anyway. Thanks for trying. Meanwhile, there's a question that's come up on the YouTube Hangout, the comment thread. Monica has a question. She says, my fear is linked to the belief that when the mind dies, there will only be darkness. The beauty of the universe appears with the mind, right? And it will disappear with its disappearance.
Well,
do you want to comment on that, Joan?
Yeah, first of all, just to notice that happens every night in deep sleep, and it's a peaceful experience. It's not a terrible experience. And in deep sleep, you're not there missing the universe, missing the beauty. That's the fear is based on the idea that you're going to be there knowing that you're not there. But so, and the beauty of, everything is disappearing moment to moment. Actually, death is actually moment to moment. Nothing is the same from one instant to the next. So it's a way that we kind of scare ourselves by coming up with this thought story of, I'll miss everything. I'll miss the beauty of the flowers, and I won't get to find out, who wins the next election, and I won't be able to see what happens to my grandchildren after they, and I won't be able to, it's a sort of story of what we're going to be missing, as if we were going to be there knowing that we're missing it. But that's the illusion. It's not that I'm not saying there's nothing after death, exactly. It's just that there's not, like, this particular movie ends the same way it ends every night in deep sleep. This particular movie, this particular character, this particular story, and you're not still there knowing that it's ended. There's something that is still here, because here is always here. But it's not me that's still here, because me isn't really here now, actually. It's a kind of illusion. I don't know if that's addressed it. If you have more to the question, or Grace, maybe you want to say something.
Oh, I feel that you did address it, and that's what's so difficult to speak about somehow, because and I see that exactly in my uncle also. There is this projection that somehow he won't be there, and it's terrible, but there's nobody there to find it terrible.
Mm-hmm.
So but the whole survival mechanism of the ego is about projecting into the future and making sure that certain things don't happen. You know, so as long as you're in that kind of, you know, projection, death does seem like a terrible thing, because then something's no longer there, whether it's experiences or whether it's me or whether it's the beauty of life, you know, and so
and yet the beauty, you know, go ahead. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
yes, go ahead.
Well, you know, like the beauty, like we see the beauty of something, a flower, and then we turn to something else and the flower is, you know, gone in a way. We're just not thinking, oh my God, the flower is gone. You know, we're turned our attention to something else. And you know, like we did earlier, if you just are here without referring to thought or memory, there's something here that is not about experiences or me or anything. It's just this presence, and even the first sense of that is not there in deep sleep, you could say, but it's like the fear is based on the idea of being a separate thing, being a separate fragment that isn't going to continue somehow, a particular experience that isn't going to continue. And most fundamentally, you know, just even the experience of aware presence, the fear that will disappear. And yet it disappears as an experience in deep sleep, and there's nothing scary about it, you know. And whatever this totality is, you know, some people put the word awareness on the totality, and I do too sometimes, but I mean, really, there's no word we can put on the totality, whatever it is, this here, now totality, that doesn't die. It's not born. It doesn't come. It doesn't go. But the me, I mean, the me who was here, you know, Joan, from 20-year-old Joan is dead and gone. You know, 5-year-old Joan is dead and gone. 50-year-old Joan is dead and gone. I mean, in a sense, everything is still here. The whole universe is still here, like the ripples in a pond that never stop. But in another sense, you know, that even this morning, you know, like think about where you had breakfast this morning. It's gone. It's completely gone. That having breakfast is gone. Where is it? It's gone. And there's nothing scary about that. It's that's actually liberating. That's the freedom of life. That's, you know, impermanence is scary if we think in terms of I'm a separate thing in this world of separate things, and all these things, including me, are impermanent. But when we see that impermanence is so complete that there's really nothing to be impermanent, it's all one whole happening here now, it's not scary, it's liberating. It's like there's nothing to hold on to. There's nothing to lose.
And you know, somehow that can only be discovered, you know, in any moment. I mean, when you really look, you know, you just have to keep looking. And you know, at some point it'll just be very obvious to you that what you thought is you and what you project into the future is not really who you are. And that's when somehow things shift around, you know, in terms of what you're afraid of, or, you know, fear may just fall away naturally because, you know, whatever it is that you were afraid of is not really who you are. how could something that's happening to somebody who you're not really, how could that be scary, you know?
And the thought of things is so much scarier than the actuality. You know, you think about, oh God, what if I break my hip? And it can be scary. But when you actually break your hip, it's just the reality of, you know, whatever's going on. And it unfolds the way it unfolds. And it's the same, you know, if you think about, oh my God, what if my best friend dies? You know, that'll be horrible, or my partner or something, you know. And it's the thought that's scary. And then if they actually die, when they die, if you're still there, that is, if they die before you, because they will die, but if they die before you, it's not the experience that you were afraid of. It's not the way you thought about it. It's, you know, there's the grief or whatever is there. And the amazing thing is that it's like what I discover when people die that I love, or when my dog died whom I loved, you know, is that what I love in those other beings is the love, is the awareness, is the beingness. That's what we really love in each other. That's what's really shining out of the eyes. That's what's really in the heart. That's what we love. And these beings that are, you know, the apparent beings that are sort of part of this dance, my mother is always with me. My dog is always with me. My first lover is always with me. My friends who have died are still, you know, they're my teachers who have died. They're all still with me, not as ghosts or something. I don't mean that way, but I mean, they're just in my cells and in my whole organism and in my heart and in my, you know, they're part of the fabric of my being. We were never separate to begin with. We were one whole happening. And like the ripples of a pond, they're still rippling. You know, we're all still here. Not again as ghosts or something. I don't mean it that way, but and the fact that they're not here, that my mother is, you know, like there were many times when my mother was alive that I wasn't with her, you know. What's the difference now? The difference is the thought that she's not there. I can't call her up. I can't go see her. The thought, the story. But there were many times when she was alive that I wasn't with her. I wasn't grieving because, you know, I didn't have that thought, that story. And I could see that when she died, you know, that I could watch it. I could see, I'd just be sitting there feeling fine, and a thought would come up, I'll never see my mother again. And suddenly, grief. You know, it's fascinating, like when something happens, like someone dies, or, you know, a relationship breaks up or something, you know, when you wake up in the morning, for a moment, you don't remember. And then it comes back to you in the grief. And that moment gets longer and longer. You know, the first few days, it's like almost instantly. And then a couple of years later, it's like, you might not think of that for weeks. You know, 10, 15 years later, it hardly ever crosses your mind. And if it does, it's not grief. And maybe it is in certain situations, you know, I don't know, losing a child or something, I don't know. But so to see, you know, how much of it is the story rather than the reality of this moment.
And I think, you know, also being with somebody who's dying is actually quite different from what you imagine it to be, you know. It's a very unique experience. And, you know, the projection of it is very different from the actual reality of it. And so it's just good to kind of, you know, realize that the fearful projections in general are just that. They're just fearful projections. They're just thoughts running wild. And, you know, if you start just trusting the experience as it unfolds instead, and you're willing to be in that, maybe, you know, to start with, you can't trust it, but you're willing to just say, okay, well, let's stay let's stay with this right now, you know. And you keep doing this, it's like you realize that there's nothing to be afraid of, you know, because fear is just a projection into the future.
Mm-hmm.
So I just quickly want to go back to the YouTube thread. Monica says, thank you, Joan. It really helps me. And Nikaya also said, thank you so much for the conversation. Your response was also very helpful. So grateful for the chance to sit in and hear all of this. Thank you for asking your questions, Nikaya, and oops, memory loss, Monica.
As we demonstrate cognitive failure.
Yes, sudden emptiness of mind. What a blessing. And Noria says, I totally agree with you, Joan. I am turning 70 in less than 1 week. And I feel more and more light and free from the idea of my identity, my history, etc. Oh, thank you for sharing that, Noria. So just to say, I'm only 57, so maybe from the perspective of 68 or 70, things look very different. What do you think, Joan?
Well, I think aging unfolds uniquely for everyone. You know, in one sense, it's the same, you know, it's the same perspective when you're 5 as when you're, my mother, you know, she would say, I feel the same way as I did when I was 6, you know, it's like there's something that's the same that, you know, and then there is the changing body and the changing, you know, and I think for me personally, menopause was the big shift. And for me, that happened in my mid 50s. Actually, my 12th moon was the month my mother died, amazingly enough. And so that's when I moved into, you know, being postmenopausal. And that for me was when, you know, my body really went through kind of radical changes. And I really began to notice aging in a very new way. And but I think for, you know, with my mother, I noticed that when she turned 80, there was a big line crossed, you know, where things just, there was a big, it seems like there's kind of these plateaus we reach, and then there's a kind of another drop or something, you know. And with my mother, I know with a lot of people, I've seen 80 be sort of a plateau right around there, where things kind of shift in a dramatic way. And then the last few years of her life were very different from the few before that, you know, because things just, again, kind of took another drop of a certain. So I think we go through these kind of plateaus and then drops and plateaus and then drops, and that's going to unfold differently for everyone. But and everyone's going to face different things, you know. And you know, I have friends who died when they were 40, you know, so they never went through any of this, you know. And we don't know how long. We don't know how long we're gonna. We never know when we're gonna die.
No. Maybe I'll just share, you know, just in confirmation also of the 80s somehow plateau. Both of my parents are still alive, and they're in their mid 80s, and they both had fairly serious health challenges in their early 80s. My father had cancer, and my mother a stroke. And the interesting thing is that, you know, the way they live together now is so different, because they're both very aware of the fragility of life. Mm-hmm. And, you know, a lot of their friends have passed already. So they keep just saying to each other, I'm so glad you're still here. I mean, they're also, you know, it's almost like they're in love in a new way. Mm-hmm. Because they just realize that life can't be taken for granted at their age, you know, and they don't know how much longer they have with each other. So of just a beautiful, it's really that they're thrown into the here and now in a new way.
Yes, yes.
With each other also, you know, and it just makes them very grateful and very loving towards each other in a way that they hadn't been before. I mean, you know, they have a fairly good relationship and long-lasting one. But somehow the love has become more alive for them through those challenges.
Yeah, and I felt that with my mother, you know, that we were in those last years together, we were very aware that, you know, she could go at any moment. And so it was like there's an awareness of how precious that was. And so we never wanted to, you know, if we were having an argument or something, we never wanted to sort of walk away from each other on that note or something, you know. It was like just, and I think, you know, as I kind of look back on life, realizing how parts of it went by without my really realizing at the time how precious it was, or how precious those people were, or that event, or that opportunity, or whatever. You know, you take things more for granted, I think, at a certain, you know, because you're always looking to the future. You know, this isn't quite it. I've got to get to the future, you know. And then when you're suddenly really brought to here now, you suddenly become very awake to how precious each moment is, and each being, and you're just grateful for, you know, I feel a lot of gratitude, you know, just for like the beauty around me, and for the rain, and for the sun, and for the deer wandering down the street, and, you know, whatever it is.
Yeah. And, you know, I just see that Pat is saying something on the YouTube thread. She says, I just wanted to say hello. I'm okay, but keep hearing many voices at the same time and cannot understand the instructions. I'm sorry, Pat.
Well, Pat, I'm glad you're here.
Yes. Thank you for trying, Pat. And, you know,
sure.
Go ahead, Joan.
I was going to say, I'm sure if I was in your position, if I had to manage all that, I'd probably not be able to figure it out either. So, I got it easier, you know, because I only had to click on one thing. But
yes,
yeah. But anyway, I'm so glad you're here, because, as you know, I love you very, very much.
And Pat says, thank you, Joan and Grace, even though I had, for some reason, an echo that did not allow me to understand well, it was still lovely and I enjoyed. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Pat. Thank you for trying. And sorry about the many voices. I tried to explain, but maybe I didn't do such a good job.
Well, I think it's challenging. I mean, like, it took me a long time to discover that, you know, people would be talking about, well, there's all these things on your screen left and right. It took me a while to realize I even had to move the mouse, you know, see all those things. Or see, you know, there's so many little things that that's part of getting older too, is that the world is, you know, all these things these technologies are developing so rapidly and everything that you know, the younger people who are growing up with these are just, to them, it's just second nature. And for me, it's like much more challenging to figure these things out, kind of get them. So.
Yes. Yeah. And, you know, I don't have a smartphone, and sometimes I'm wondering, you know, am I avoiding something here? Or, you know, I just like keeping things simple. So
I just got an iPhone and I love it, but I'll tell you a good story, which is that my mother, you know, everybody, when I was with my mother at the end, everyone was telling me, you should have a cell phone. You really need a cell phone, because what if, you know, you need to be able to reach you. And I just didn't have one. And the day she actually died, like I said, I was driving her friend home at the time.
Mm.
You know, and in retrospect, I realized that if I had had a cell phone, they would have been trying to call me. And I would have gotten the call that, you know, your mom is slipping away, get back here really quickly. And I would have been driving in a panic, you know, desperately trying to get back. Instead, I just felt this huge moment of peace as I was driving, and I had the thought, driving the car is part of my mother's dying. And I know that happened exactly when she died, because it was right when the sunset light, everything turned orange, and they told me that's exactly when she died. And, you know, and I was driving along very peacefully, and, you know, I walked up to the apartment, and she had just died. And I, you know, it felt perfect, like she needed to go and I wasn't there. Like in some way my presence would have held her back. You know, it was like, and there were other people there. And they were the ones who needed to be holding her hand at that moment for whatever reason. You know, it's like, you know, we set these things up, but we can't really control them. And so, but if I'd had a cell phone, you know, I don't think it would have really helped. It would have put me in a panic. So,
yeah.
I mean, I have one now, but I'm just saying, you know, these things that we think we need, we don't really need anything.
Yes, and I think that is part of the freedom of growing older, is to say, well, you know what? No, I don't think I need that. And, you know, my mother refuses to sit in front of a computer. She doesn't understand computers, you know. Thankfully, I can email my father, which is nice because they're in Germany. But she just says, no, that's not, she's not into that. So, you know, and that's her freedom. Good on her that she refuses to do that. You know, why should she? We have this idea that old people need to kind of use these opportunities, but, you know, she loves writing letters, so she still writes letters, and she's sad that I don't anymore, you know. And I keep telling her that if only she got herself in front of the computer, she could email me. But yeah, that's one of those things. Anyway, I see that Pat has joined us. Pat, would you like to ask a question? Hi, Pat. Pat, can you, you just muted yourself. I'm going to unmute you. Here you are.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi, Pat.
Hey, Joan, how are you?
All right.
No, I didn't have a question, but I did maybe just want to share something. We've spoken, Joan, and I don't know, I'm sure I mentioned it, but my father passed away. It's now 10 months. It's hard to believe it's that long, but I was going to say that I've been lucky enough to be with both my parents when they passed away, and actually to be present for, I have 3 children, to actually be present with all my children when they were born, and remarkable similarities to the energy, to the energy of this, you know, there's just like this overwhelming energy that can fill the room. Sometimes people refer to it as grace. It certainly felt like that when my parents were exiting. And like you describing your mother, when my mom died, and she was fairly young, she was 56, I was 33, I couldn't get over how strikingly beautiful the whole everything was. I mean, it was kind of bizarre. My sisters and my father were having their own experience, which didn't seem to be the one I was having at all. I thought my mom was so gorgeous in death that I actually wanted to take a picture of her so I could remember her that way. Not as she was when she was alive and young and vibrant and beautiful, but this graceful figure laying there, and she was skeletal. You know, I mean, she was skin and bone. But to see this incredible, graceful figure laying there, you know, unanimated, but still in some way, just, you know, still can't actually capture it in words, but it's just an amazing experience. And just so grateful that I actually got to be there with both of them when they were passing.
Mm. I love what you say too about the similarity of birth and death. And I haven't been with anyone during a human birth. I don't have children, but the only birth I ever witnessed was puppies. But the only being I was ever with at the actual moment of death was my dog. I seem to have a habit of being out of the room at the exact moment that the person dies. But it's interesting. Years ago, I worked with a woman whose 17 or 18-year-old son was killed in a car accident, and she was someone who had done a lot of pioneering work around birth, natural childbirth and stuff. And she had given birth to a number of children herself. And I remember her remarking at the time how similar birth and death were, how that had struck her so deeply, that there was something so similar about birth and death. So it was interesting you said that.
Yeah. Yeah, it felt like, if I could, describe the experience, it felt like I was very cognizant of what we've been talking about, some incredible force. You could call life, you could call it almost anything, but that it entered the room, and it was so much bigger and so much more in control of what was happening than, what maybe you were previously aware of. I was with a friend when she took her last breath also, and it was the same thing. It was just that, that people talk about this peace can descend. Words, that's a metaphor, but for me, there was this actual sense of something is entering this space. Maybe it was just something that I just became aware of in that moment, but it felt like the room filled up with some kind of peace, some kind of grace, some kind of force or energy that didn't seem to be there in another moment, the previous moment, when somebody was actually still alive and that energy was animating their body. It's like what people say when that energy gets one of my first teacher, when he died, and I was in the hospice where he was dying. When he left his body, I felt his presence, his energy, so much more available and so much more powerful. His presence was freed from his body, it felt like, and I could feel it everywhere. And I felt the same thing with my mother. Like you said, when my mother passed away, I had my personal experience which was of grief, and I was crying and having that person. And at the same time, everywhere I looked, I could just feel my mother's presence. It was, it was like a incredibly paradoxical, strange experience to be having. I miss my mother on a personal level because she's passed away. And on another level, I can't find anywhere where she isn't.
Right. Yes. I feel that. Yeah. And what you're describing is, certainly what I felt in the aftermath of my mother dying, and my first lover and my dog, and the friends I've been, when I've been there immediately right after death. Or, it's just that feeling of, and it's kind of like, I feel like, it's like the bubble has popped and something is just like, there's a light that fills the space or something, like a presence and or something. It's very, and many people comment on that. It's, it's so, it is powerful. It's and it's palpable. It's palpable.
Yeah. And
my sense is that basically, somehow in those moments of birth and death, and again, I haven't experienced both, but I have experienced people passing, and somehow it's like the narrowed perspective gets opened up, gets blown up,
Yes,
And
yes.
it's not like something enters that's not there before.
Right.
It's that we, in the moment where somebody passes, and leaves that contraction behind,
Mm-hmm.
somehow we're able to share this perception of the fullness, of the mystery, of the light, the peace, however it is experienced. It's like when we are there or when we are connected with that person, it just transmits itself so fully.
Mm-hmm.
So that, Joan, you didn't even have to be there.
I was driving.
That peace was there as you were driving, and you knew that was the moment. And however it is, however it transmits itself, it's like it's so powerful because the perception gets blown open. That's what's powerful about it, as I understand it. It's not that something shows itself that wasn't there before. It's that we are able to actually our perceive it, because our perception is no longer limited. There's a grace that allows us to be free of those contractions, just as the person who passed. And in the moment of birth, I mean, I imagine what we become aware of is the mystery of how something that is unlimited can enter a contracted form, and it's that is a mystery too, just as it's a mystery that form can come to an end, and yet the consciousness that animates it is still here, and it's unlimited. It's back to being unlimited at that point. So, somehow I feel it like it just reveals to us how limited our perception is most of the time.
Yeah, I like how you put that, just sort of sharing the opening of that contraction, and I just want to say one thing too, that I'm aware that sometimes when we describe experiences, there are people listening who maybe haven't had that particular experience. Maybe they were with someone who died and they didn't feel expansive and blissful, and then the thought comes up, what's wrong with me? Why didn't I have that experience? And so I just want to say that, whatever experience you're having is the right experience and the only experience in the moment. It's sort of like the whole, I always feel like there's a danger when we start talking about experiences that, people can latch on to, comparing, did I have that experience? I don't think so. What's wrong with me? So I just wanted to add that to what I feel has been a beautiful description of what I've experienced and what both of you are talking about. And just that if people have been in the presence of death and not felt that, that's okay too.
Yeah, so it's just like the description of any experience of the mind opening, whether it's a full-blown awakening experience or whether it's just a perception that somehow at some point the mind stops, like for some people the mind never stops. Does that mean they don't know the emptiness of life? No, not necessarily.
It stops, they just aren't noticing it,
Yes, exactly.
It's like, and it happens in so many different ways. And for some people, at a death situation, and for other people, at a birth, and maybe at other people just at a traffic stop or something, who knows?
And for me, really, what I come to see more and more is that the one thing we need to watch is the mind who says it has to look a certain way.
Yes, yeah.
You know, it has to be like real. And, you know, instead, actually, you know, if we can let go of that thought that experience should be any other way than what it is, we can trust life to reveal itself to us fully, you know, in any moment. If, you know, it's really just a question of willing to let go of the mind that would have it a certain way.
Yeah. And I think, you know, experiencing, my teacher, Tony Packer, used to talk about experience mongering and, you know, our sort of habit of chasing experiences and wanting certain, and that's, you know, we hear about awakening experiences or death experiences or whatever, and then we kind of approach the experience wanting that maybe, and then that's a setup for, and then that very wanting is sort of what blocks that very opening that, you know, and, or, you know, even just like with my mother, I wanted to be there at the moment she died. I mean, that was the plan, and I wasn't. And so, you know, as it turned out, I was okay with that, you know, and I didn't resist that. It was okay. But it could have been, you know, this big thing of like, oh my God, I missed it, you know. And
you missed it, that's right. If only you had had a cell phone.
Yeah. Only I had cell phone. Yeah. And so, you know, it's sort of like it's that desire to control things is where we always, you know, run into suffering, because life so often doesn't go the way we had planned it.
Yes. And,
Well,
you know, I think, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna, since we're sharing, maybe I could just share that maybe I lied a little bit. I wasn't actually with my mother when she took her last breath. I was in her bedroom right next door meditating. My aunt was holding her. And the moment she passed, my whole body just kind of jumped up off the ground. And when I was with my dad and he was dying, he took, you know, a week or so in his deathbed. I mean, I sat there with him for 3 or 4 days, and then I had to go somewhere. So I asked him, I said, I don't need to leave, but I was actually thinking of leaving tomorrow, you know, yeah, but it's up to you. I can stay if you want me to. And he said, no, it's fine, go. So I actually took off and let my sisters finish up with them, which was kind of interesting. You know, it felt like, oh, we're done. We've done our work. We're saying goodbye. I won't see you again, and probably. And, you know, interesting way to kind of finish our journey with each other, to know that I'm not going to be here when you take your last breath, and good luck. I'd kind of, you know, done what I could do with them.
Yeah, and it sort of happens in so many different ways, you know, and like my father died all alone at home. My mother was gone off doing something else, and, you know, she was going to pick him up at the dentist. And when she got to the dentist, he wasn't there. You know, he'd never left home. He died in his chair. But it was so like my father to die alone with nobody there. I mean, it was just the way my father was, you know, that would be the way. And for another friend of mine who's a doctor, you know, says that it's often the case that people die, you know, all the relatives are there and they're all gathered around the bed for days and days on end. And then finally they all go down to the cafeteria and that's when the person dies, you know. It's like, I feel like it always happens in exactly the way it needs to in each relationship and in each situation.
Right. Yeah. And for me, that was the perfect way to end it with my father. You know, I was 66 at the time. He was 89. It was kind of a big boy relationship at that point. I was able to say, hey, buddy, good seeing you. And, you know, see you again, maybe. I didn't say that. I did say see you again. And, you know, got to go. Got stuff to do. Which wasn't well, it was true. Yeah, I'm in a different phase of my life. And he completely understood that. which was a beautiful way to end it on a mature kind of adult level for us. It was a big kind of step, honestly.
Thank you for sharing so honestly about this, you know.
Welcome. Thank you. I appreciate this conversation because it is so honest. There was, you know, when I think back about both my parents and how they went, I was too young to really have an adult conversation with my mom at the time. And my father and I just honestly never got around to it until basically the very, very end. And I was so grateful for that actually he didn't have the strength, as we've been talking about, to keep up the facade, that actually the relationship that I wanted to have with my father my whole life was actually able to have with him in his last week of life, because he couldn't keep up the BS. He couldn't hardly talk. All I could do was just sit there and help him drink a little glass of water, or you know, finish a sentence, or hold his hand, or brush his hair or something. I mean, you know, it was the relationship that I kind of wanted to have with my dad my whole life, which was just to be able to be there with him and not have a bunch of stuff get in the way.
Sort of like, you know, what's really going on is just love, you know, love. And in the end,
Exactly.
that's what we can finally really appreciate, is just
Exactly.
simplicity of just being there in love. Not having to be somebody, not having to evaluate, not having to, you know, all of that is kind of out of the picture, and there's just the love and the being.
That was it, Joan. And I'll just say one more touching thing and let it go at that. But at one point, you know, he was in and out of consciousness on morphine. But we had, you know, he had lucid moments. And at one moment, he actually stuck his hands out to me and reached out and said my name. And I said, "Yeah, Dad, what is it?" And he repeated my name again. I said, "I'm here. You know, what is it, Dad?" He stuck his hands out and he said, "Would you forgive me? Would you take my sins and would you forgive me?" And I was like, "Whoa, okie dokie." But I said, I didn't skip a beat. I said, "Yeah, sure, Dad, give me your sins. Yeah, and of course, I think I said, actually, there's nothing to forgive, but okay. If you need forgiven, sure, I forgive you." It was quite a touching moment. I did not see it coming.
Wow. No, thank you, Pat.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think I'd like to, we'll kind of come to a beautiful ending, you know, really coming to the essence of what this is all about, which is to know the love and the light and the beingness, to know that which expresses in all of it, and somehow the aging and the dying brings us closer to that, because ultimately it liberates us to that, liberates the human form from the contraction that separates it out from the truth of it, you know. And so, you know, your dad expressed that in his own way, Pat, you know. And when we feel the peace or the light or the love that is present when somebody leaves, it's the same thing, you know, we're liberated to that in those moments. And so other people are passing, you know. Joan, did you want to say something to close?
Oh, just that, you know, that love and that being and that beauty and that awakeness is always right here. That's where it always is, in this presentness right here, right now. And not to be looking for it in some other form.
Yes.
And the form is
Not even
showing
in
up.
aging and dying.
Yeah, that we don't have to be aging or dying, or we don't have to do aging and dying in any particularly correct way. Just that it's always right here, right now, and not to be wanting it to show up in a different form than the form it's appearing as in this very moment.
Yes. Beautiful. Thank you, Joan.
Thank you, Grace. This has been really wonderful.
And thank you, everybody. Thank you to everybody who joined. Thank you to everybody who asked questions and who watched. And thank you, Pat. And thank you again, Joan. It's lovely to come to be in this with you and to come to this beautiful ending.
I have enjoyed it greatly. Yeah. Thank you, Grace. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, and see you again soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.